How did the war on drugs impact different races in America? Well, this is too vague, and we need to narrow it down. So let's just focus on part one, which is the war on drugs. Okay, so the war on drugs is roughly decades long, and so we need to focus on a particular part of the war on drugs. So let's just say Ronald Reagan's war on drugs. So that narrows it down from multiple decades to about 8 years between 1980 and 1988. So, but even Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, those 8 years, has many phases and parts to it. So, and it also lasted for years. So which aspect? So let's just focus on the Just Say No campaign against drug use, right? So let's leave that alone for now, and we're going to shift to another part of the question. Let's talk about different races. We can't do different races. We have to kind of just choose one. And so for our purposes, let's look at how it impacted African Americans. And actually, all African Americans is really huge. So let's try to narrow it down to teens and see how we do with that. And then we're going to shift to yet the other part of the question, which you've been cautioned not to do this, but you can't do all of America. Like, that's just not okay. So we have to think about what we want to focus on. So we can do American cities for now, just because if we're trying to look at the war on drugs and Just Say No and Ronald Reagan and African American teens, cities is a good place to look. All right, so are we done? No, we're not, actually, because we have this research question, but what we don't know is how will we actually know whether the Just Say No campaign of the Ronald Reagan era in the war on drugs in American cities has had any impact at all. So what would we look at to measure? And so for this, we would look at, we're really looking for a metric, some kind of number. So public opinion polls, number of arrests involving drug charges, incarceration rates for drug charges, which is a little bit different. Arrest and incarceration are slightly different from one another. Political speeches, campaign speeches are a really good idea. Grassroots movements, community organizations, advocacy, political activism, studies and research that have been done on this topic, and then statistical analysis of urban life. So I think those are really good starting points. What you want to be able to build is a body of evidence, and numbers create really great evidence. It's not the only kind of evidence you should have, but it's an important part of what you should look at. So what we want to do now is let your research guide further revision. So for example, we went to this is ClassLink, and we went to the library folder in ClassLink, and we opened the button or the app that says cross search databases. I don't know if slides are slow to load or... And so what we have here is the portal that allows us to use one set of advanced search boxes and cross-search most of our databases. So we're going to replace that puppies and kittens with a different search. So we're looking for Just Say No in quotation marks because we want those words to stay together. We're looking for Reagan because it was kind of Nancy Reagan's thing, but also Ronald Reagan, so just make it Reagan. And then that third row, I actually, because it is pretty long, is we're looking for teen and African American or African American hyphened, which is no longer appropriate, but used to be the way it was written, or Black. And I choose not to capitalize for any of this except for the connector words, the and the ors, because those are computer functions, but I'm pretty sloppy about capitalization when it comes to searching. And then the last row, the fourth row, is cities or city or urban. And we're just leaving select a field, which is the default in the right boxes, and we're going to run our search from there. So I was able to find actually quite a few really good sources, many of which were ebooks. So How the Streets Were Made by Yelena Bailey. And when you go to the source and you open the book, obviously I'm not going to use the whole book, but there is a search within. So I just searched for Just Say No and found some pretty cool stuff, right? It talks about what kind of role it played on white middle class and Black America on the other side. So basically how it affected both communities. Here's another book. It's called South Bronx Battles. Another really insightful quote to take from this. And, again, just a quote from an entire book. And this is what you're able to do with Search Within, right? Search just say no, and you end up with that. So one of the problems I have with these two sources is neither about teens. So maybe teens are too narrow. And this is what I mean about let your research guide your further revisions. And then, so I take the teens out of it, and it just becomes impact African Americans in American cities. And then my next source, which was also in that same list of results, also an ebook, had quite a few entries for Just Say No. And then this one specifically talked about adolescence. So maybe I put it back in. I really, like, there's a symbiosis between your research question and the research you're doing. And it's okay to move back and forth and take things out and put them back in depending on the sources you find. In fact, that really is a sign of really thoughtful research. So please, by all means, let your research be your guide.